Buen día, bienvenidos y bienvenidas, amigos y amigas. I'm coming back with another episode for you from El Rincón del Profe Jeff as we continue our journey through different countries in Latin America, especially. And as you can tell, this week, bow down, show you the hat, that we are going to visit Ecuador. Now, with that introduction, we'll get the hat in its proper position and get on to it. Introducing Ecuador. Obviously, the name has a huge amount to do with its location in the world. So let's jump right into our map and check out where we're at. Let me focus that a little bit better for us here in the center. Yeah, so zoom out and we can see that Ecuador has the equator running right through it. So that's where it derives its name from. Ecuador, right in the middle or the top of Latin America. Since I've got it here, give a shout out to the Selección Ecuatoriana. Was a gift from some good friends of mine. Shout out to the Del Corrales for this is their Ecuadorian soccer shirt from the World Cup in 2022. One of the cool things about it, which has to do with what we're talking about, let me jump out and I can show you. On the back of it, you'll see that it has the map of Ecuador, and then it says 0 degrees north, 0 minutes, seconds, so you know you're at the equator right there. So matches the colors of my hat too. Those are the colors from their country and their flag. So one of my favorite places that I've visited. Lots of people always ask, and so we'll go with that now. Lots of people always ask, what are your favorite countries to visit? So I'll break that down real quick, and then we'll get back to the map. Obviously, my heart always lies in Argentina because that's where I live the most and have the most experience and connection. Of course, it's been a long time ago. Second, we'll be coming up on Costa Rica in one of our future episodes. But that's also a place that I visit a lot because of the groups of students that I take. So my third, it would be Ecuador, and I'll talk about some of the experiences I've had there. I've had the opportunity to visit twice. I was always visiting our partner schools in those places, and so we'll share some experiences there. One of my favorite things about Ecuador, though, is the connection that they have with the indigenous people, and we'll get into that in a second. So, all right, so back to our map as we explore a little bit more of Ecuador. So Ecuador, I don't want to zoom too far in because Ecuador, we know, is this small country, one of the smaller countries in Latin America as well, but great diversity. We need to mention that out here off of the coast are what are known as the Galapagos Islands, Islas Galapagos, and those are made famous obviously because of Charles Darwin and his visits there, but I've never been there. It's one of the bucket list places to go to visit the wildlife, especially the marine life, as that's one of my interests there. But when we talk about mainland Ecuador, we'll show some pictures from Galapagos, and always, I'll put the disclaimer up now that all the images and things that I share as part of this podcast are used for educational purposes only. Check out the videos. I've got a lot of them in the video description for Galapagos and other parts of Ecuador, so make sure and include that in your journey through Ecuador. But geographically speaking, Ecuador and a couple of other countries that are similar here in as far as where they're located, Colombia, Peru specifically, are divided into three major areas. What we call La Costa, of course, that would be here in includes one of the most famous places, Manta in Ecuador. Also, Guayaquil is considered a coast country or coastal city, and we'll check out some pictures of that. And then we come up to what they call the Sierra, or the mountain range, because we have the Andes mountains that run right through it. Quito is up in the situated in the mountains, and very beautiful city as well. And then we have the region that joins part of the Amazon jungle. So you'll see here, this is Ecuador shares borders with Peru on the east and Colombia on the north. So all of this region right here, is part of the Amazon rainforest area that feeds into the Amazon River. So that's something to keep in mind. So some places we're going to visit. The only place I've formally visited in Ecuador is Quito, which is the capital city. And so we'll talk about some of the experiences there. On one trip, the airplane that I took when I was flying down to Chile from Ecuador made a stopover in Guayaquil, so I saw it from the air in the airport. I can't say the huge difference in climate because obviously up in Quito, we're going to be in the upper mountains. There are some volcanoes up here I'll show a picture of here in a minute that have snow on them year round, and many people think, well, that's crazy, we're on the equator. But yeah, but you're super high up along the equator. And down here in Guayaquil, it was, even though it was, it was a layover and get off the plane, you could feel the difference in the humidity and that kind of climate there. Okay, so just keep the map in mind as we visit these different places. A couple of interesting points from Ecuador. We mentioned a little bit in previous episodes about the Imperio Inca, the Incan Empire. This was one of the most northern parts of the Incan Empire. In fact, one of their last emperors, whose name was Atahualpa, was born in Quito, and he would be the final one that was in existence until the Spaniards came in and obviously conquered them and established their colonial reign and that would be around the early 1500s that all that took place. We'll do a special episode just on the Incan Empire, but that was such an enormous empire. Its center being in Peru, but southernmost points were in Argentina and northern Chile, all the way up to in the north to Quito and beyond, because there was interactions with other, by commerce and trade through other places. Okay. Well, let's talk about a couple of, why don't I just pull up the pictures here and we'll start going through those, and I'll jump in and out and tell some stories about my trip there. So, trips there. This is the capital city of Quito. You can see that it's a huge metropolis, down cathedrals in the center. One of my favorite parts of the city was the downtown Plaza de Armas, the plaza where there's a cathedral and people are selling things. It's a huge plaza. One thing that I haven't talked about, and I'll invite you to do if you are interested in or use virtual reality headsets, there are great videos, 360-degree videos, and I'll include some of those in the video description so you can take tours of some of these places if those videos do exist. But this is one place where you'll see large concentrations of the descendants of the Inca, the in Ecuador, still speaking their language, which is Quichua and Spanish. So many people are bilingual. I don't know many words. The only words I know are ñoña and ñoño, because those are terms of endearment for brother and sister. And I learned those again from our friends, the Corral in Ecuador. Okay, moving along. One of the I mentioned Ecuador is there are lots of volcanoes. This is one of the most famous ones. This is on the southern if you leave Quito and travel south, you'll see this volcano called Cotopaxi, and lots of if you're adventurous, I've never been there. You can see it from the city, but there are adventures to go hiking, biking, horseback riding, visiting different places. There's a national park as with volcanoes there. So that's part of life in Ecuador. You'll see this one shows the volcano erupting, which includes earthquakes and all those kinds of things. So those are all things to deal with in Ecuador. One of the most interesting places that I've been to, so traveling a little bit north from Quito. In fact, let's pull the map up and we can zoom in there, see if we can find it on the map. To zoom out and find the line. There we go. So there's, maybe it's not going to show up for us. Sorry, should have looked up that before I start talking about it. But anyway, it's a place called the Mitad del Mundo. So this is a monument that's built on the equator. Pop out for a sec, but there you can see the line going down the middle. Obviously the end means north, norte in Espanol, south, sur in Espanol, and then there's este, east, and oeste, starts with an O in Spanish for west. One of the coolest experiences in my visit out here was with Patti and her family, and we went out to visit the Mitad del Mundo. Got a little relic from there. It's a replica of the monument, and you can see the directions on it for north, south, east, and west. But one of the coolest things we did when we went there to visit was they have a museum here at this monument and all around, but there are certain experiences and experiments, and I've included a link to a video about that in the video description below. So make sure and check that out, where that can only happen around the equator. Okay, so I'm going to ask you the question here, and you can answer in the comments below, but check out the video and see especially which way the water flows when you're in the southern hemisphere, and which way the water flows down the drain when you're in the northern hemisphere. But they do that experiment at one of these sites, and then how the water flows when you're right on the equator. They actually move a basin to the southern, to the northern, and then on the equator and dump water down it. So check it out and see which way it goes, clockwise, counterclockwise, and let me know. But they also do other things, that on the equator you actually are lighter, about I believe it's 3 kilos lighter. So if you want to do an instant weight loss, go weigh yourself on the equator if you happen to be there, and you can say you've lost so many pounds. But one of the coolest things, and this is obviously on my bucket list, who knows if that will ever happen, but on the spring equinox and the fall equinox, you can stand on the equator line. So in March, we're close to March now at the recording of this. So in the northern hemisphere, when we move from winter to spring, then if you stand on the equator right at noon, you will have no shadow because the sun is straight over your head as the earth passes back and forth. So some cool stuff about that we don't think about when we're that far away from the equator. I remember when I traveled there, I had my GPS. This was before cell phones really showed GPS. It's been that long ago, but I had one of the old GPS markers, and remember standing right on the equator and having that same 0000 reading that is on the back of the uniform here. So yeah, just cool to think about. Cool to think about where it is and what it does. Something that I was surprised about because I had never really contemplated that before, and you can tell by the background there that it's most people think equator. We already talked about that with the snow on the mountains, but they think it's going to be. We think it's going to be, all covered with jungle and rainy all the time. Well, it does rain a lot, but in Quito, especially, it's a lot cooler. But you can see that the vegetation is quite different. And actually, when we went to the Mitad del Mundo, you come down in elevation, so it was a little warmer. Yeah, but anyway, cool things to check out in the video description there with the Mitad del Mundo, middle of the world. Okay, this is a picture of Guayaquil, which is down on the coast. This is an inlet that comes in. Huge city in Ecuador. Obviously, a lot of the trade comes in and out of this port. Some places to have some fun and shop and spend time at the beach. Another famous city in Ecuador is called Cuenca. This is known for it's one of the oldest colonial cities in Ecuador. We should say that there are a lot of, and as always, check out the videos that I've included in the video description under the history section because it'll go through the specifics of history of Ecuador. But obviously, there are some important major points that I'd like to mention real quick since we're talking about colonial times. So prior to the arrival of the Spaniards in this part of the country or world, we'll say, this was part of the Incan Empire, El Imperio Inca. And then as the Spaniards came in, it formed part of what they called the Viceroyalty of Peru. So Lima was a more important center, and so that's where everything reported to. But then later on, they broke off and formed part of La Nueva Granada, which was part of Colombia. And when you see the colors on my hat today, and when you see our episodes on Colombia and Venezuela, you'll notice that the colors are similar, and that's because they had similar histories because of their grouping in Nueva Granada. And so the Independence Day that they celebrate in Ecuador is the 10th of August, 10 de agosto, which they call it El Día del Primer Grito de Independencia. That's when it was their first shout or cry for independence from Spain, and that was in 1809. But it wasn't until much later in the 20s, I believe it was 1822, that's one of the final battles that they had it's called the Batalla de Pichincha, which is Pichincha is a place in Ecuador. It's right outside of Quito, so it was around Quito. And that was involved Antonio José de Sucre and Simón Bolívar. And Simón Bolívar is known as one of the liberators of Ecuador and many other countries, but also Venezuela and Colombia. So lots of connected history with those places, and that's why their colors and things are similar. All right, let's get on to some of the other places. This is a picture of the Amazon region. Again, remember from our map, it was Costa, the coast, Sierra, the mountain area, and Amazonas, so the Amazon region. A lot of cool things to do out there. Again, I've never been here, but I've heard about them. One of the things that I would love to do, my friends that have told me about, is uh, they have lots of wildlife rescue places for animals from the Amazonas that have been injured, and they're helping them, revive and recover. Got a picture here of the Galapagos. Again, that's the extreme other side from the Amazonas. The series of islands that are out there belong to Ecuador. They up for a long time there weren't a lot of permanent settlements, but there are some now, and they're restricted to how many people can be there. Obviously protecting the environment, but it's obviously a popular tourist destination in order to see and those places there. Okay, let's talk about some of the products. Here we've got a bunch of different flowers. So cut flowers is one of the biggest export items from Ecuador. And if you check, I love to look at labels when I'm at stores to see where things come from. We're not too far past Valentine's. We went in and saw boxes in the florist areas of different supermarkets and stores around town. Some of them said product of Colombia, others said product of Ecuador. And my friends have a son that actually has an export business from Ecuador to the United States, where he imports roses, especially from Ecuador, into the United States. So if you got some, they may be from Ecuador. Also, be curious. I always look at labels when I'm looking at fruits. We talked about that in the Chile episode. I like to see where the bananas come from too. Lots of them come from Ecuador. So that's one of their important products. This picture didn't turn out too well, a little bit fuzzy, but that is a picture of cacao, which is chocolate. So when I found out that Ecuador was one of the biggest exporters or producers of cacao chocolate in the world, I started investigating. This is some years ago, and so back then my dream job, of course I'm in my dream job now, being a professor and being able to talk and share the things which I've learned. But if I had things, since I am a chocolate lover, I thought, well, I understand Spanish. Maybe it would have been a good career to be in the chocolate business. Get to travel to Ecuador a lot, get to sample chocolate, get to be out there with it. But that's a chance. Check again your labels to see where the cacao and chocolate comes from, as Ecuador is one of the biggest producers of chocolate. To mention that too, I've included in the video description videos on the whole cacao process, because what you saw on the screen was the cacao pod, and inside that are the seeds that they produce. They dry and then grind and get the cocoa powder then to make chocolate and all those kinds of things. All right. Warning before I put up this next picture. It may not be for the faint-hearted or if your stomach gets upset a lot, but we're going to jump into one of the most famous products as far as food is concerned with Ecuador, and that is cuy. This is barbecued or fried guinea pig, which is a traditional food of Ecuador. I'm going to jump back out here and grab a prop from back here. You'll see I have some props. These are some recuerdos, some souvenirs, gifts. The poncho is a gift of a former student of mine who lives in Ecuador. This is something I brought back. You'll see the Cotopaxi volcano in the background and a traditional village from some times past. Um, Here's a little depiction of what maybe a traditional home might have looked like. And you'll see up in the top it says papas con cuy. So that was their traditional dish. If you look close, they have some things that are looking a little bit like cuy and some papas and things like that. But traditionally, um, outside the house, they keep little uh, pens of cuy, and that's where you can go and pick your dinner. I've never tried it, but I've if I were to go back again sometime, I think I would probably do it just to say I had. Um, it's from what I understand, it's quite the experience. If I've included some videos on preparing and tasting cucuy, if you'd like to check that out in after watching or listening to the podcast. So back to some of the other products. This is kind of a practice combination product. This is a picture of a place called the market in Otavalo, which is a important indigenous section of Ecuador. Again, a little bit northeast of Quito, and a place where you can see all the different artifacts, and you'll see woven products, knitted products that are traditional and typical of Ecuador. Okay. Okay, well, probably the biggest export, and this isn't probably the best picture to share, but it's the reality. And this is especially for the Amazon region, but Ecuador, its biggest export is oil, petroleum. So countries from all the world, and also Ecuador, have gone in and drilled in this area, and then they have pipelines running out to the coastal areas, and that's where how oil is taken from the interior to the exterior of Ecuador. So obviously there are environmental concerns and issues, and that's one of the perspectives. I've included some of those videos in the video description, so check those out. It's always the balance, we've talked about it with all of our episodes of, we talked about it in Paraguay with the hydroelectric plants. We talked about it in Chile with the mines, and now in Ecuador with the oil. These are their products that they have to export, and the difficulty and the perspective comes in how do we maintain that balance of things, nature, and providing work and sustainability as far as economic uh, resources for the people that live there, but then also figuring out how that works with the environment. So I'm not saying one, again, I don't put judgments on which one is good, which one is best. They're just better or worse. They're always just different, and living there helps figure out what kinds of things those are. So a couple other facts about Ecuador. It's one of the only countries in Latin America that back in, I believe it was the early 2000s, around 2000, Ecuador decided to align their economy as far as um, their money and their monetary devices. So they are one of the countries in Latin America that uses the dollar as their currency. So if you go to Ecuador, your dollars are the same there as they are here. Of course, prices are a little bit different. Please check out the section on perspectives and history, because they've had a up and down history as far as governments go. Fortunately, they have not passed through dictatorships, and I'll put the air quotes, because some presidents can be considered dictators and others not, but they've always had there is always social strife. One of the saddest things that I remember seeing in the news was during COVID, and there were lots of things that can come out during COVID, and you may remember some of those. But Ecuador was one of the hardest hit places from COVID, and remember seeing news reports about the numbers of people that had passed away, and it was just a sad thing. And as well with the political strifes and things. So there are all those kinds of things that are at play in Ecuador as well. I'd like to share a couple of experiences. One of them was one of my, I already shared the experience about going to Mitad del Mundo, and that was a very memorable day. But on another trip, I remember a couple of things, and we'll talk about food real quick. One with some empanadas. We were eating lunch, so a colleague and I went down to visit the school that we're partnered with in Quito, and the folks who owned it invited us to their home, and we had a lunch. Actually a dinner, kind of lunch dinner. We call it at our house, but I had some of the best empanadas that I've had in my life at that gathering, and they were empanadas. They were white. Normally, they're a different color, but when I was asking about it, it was because they were made with rice flour, so they were white and a lot lighter than I remember other empanadas that I've had in Latin America and here in the United States. But cheese and meat, and they were wonderful. I always remember that. And then on that same trip, my colleague and I we stayed with host families there that work with the school, and that's always, if you're thinking of traveling to these places, and especially travel study and have the opportunity to do that, I always recommend trying to stay with locals, because that way you get the true experience of what it's like to be there. And I stayed with a wonderful family in Quito. Remember going out, and we were there in September, and it was rainy. It had been rainy that whole week. And my colleague and I walked downtown Quito, and we got to a part. We said, "Oh well, let's take a ride or walk up this side just to see what's there." And we got into a place that seemed sketchier and sketchier and sketchier, and pretty soon we saw that there were some gates and an announcement that we were getting close to a prison. So we thought, well, this probably isn't the best place to be. And I kind of chuckled to myself as we turned around. We kind of both looked at each other and said, "Let's get out of here." And we turned around and headed back down. I always carry an umbrella with me whenever I go traveling, and I got used to this when I was living in Argentina. And there are those umbrellas that you pop. There's a button and it pops and comes out like that. I use them for defense against dogs, because there are dogs all over in different places, and you just pop them in the nose, and as they come up barking, if you feel like they're going to get to you, you can pop them in the nose and they'll go away. I thought my umbrella isn't going to help me in this neighborhood, so we got out of there as fast as we could, went back down to where there was more hustle and bustle in downtown, and we found a little bar restaurant. And I'll put there are some links to some of the Andean music, and I'm going to do an episode just on Andean music, because it's one of the best things that I've come in contact with Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, northern Argentina, and Chile. But we kind of heard this band playing in there, and it was a group of traditional Andean music. So we went in, and it was more a bar than a restaurant. And I'm not a person who drinks, but my colleague did. So we asked what they had, and I found out they they sold hot chocolate, and it was by the quart, and they were huge mugs. And so we sat there, and I sipped on my hot chocolate, and he had his preferred beverage. And we sat there for a couple hours just listening to the band play and sing. And I think I downed two of those huge mugs of chocolate. So good memories and good experiences from Ecuador. Um, One of the other dishes that I remember eating was it's called Encebollado. It's a traditional dish as well. If you're familiar with Mexican food as well, there's a food called enchilada. So enchilada means it's full of chili. So encebollado means it's full of cebolla, and cebolla in Spanish is onion. So different ways to cook. Obviously, seafood's going to be an important part of the food in Ecuador. Ceviche is super popular. But check all those out. I'll include them in the video description below. Let me see. I think I've covered everything that I have in my notes. But just to remind us as we explore the different P's of culture, the productos, prácticas, perspectivas, and then the fourth P of people. Remember that all of these influences and places people live make a difference in how they think, how we act, and what we do. And again, that things are neither bad nor good, but they're different as far as cultural practices and perspectives. So I'd like to close as usual with a quote from one of the authors from Ecuador. His name is Jorge Icaza. He says, La realidad es dura, pero más dura es la injusticia. So reality is harsh, but what is more harsh is injustice. Ecuador, con su historia de lucha y resistencia, nos enseña el valor de la identidad y de la perseverancia. So Ecuador, with its history of fighting and resilience or resistance, teaches us the value of identity and perseverance. So with that, I'll invite you to explore on your own, learn as much as you can about Ecuador. If you get the chance to go there someday, please do so. You'll love it. So until always invite you to come back for our next episode. Please include your critiques, your questions, or other comments in the comment section below. So until next time, adios, hasta la próxima.